Hey everybody, welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture, and we are back in the saddle once again for another season. And I do have a sponsor for this episode. It's brought to you by Nightwolf. Born into the outcast breed of werewolves known as the Mononoke, 18-year-old Rodney Marcelli is reluctantly pulled into an ancient war between good and evil during a modern time where the lines have been blurred. With the help of Snowpaw, the pure-blooded Monokai, and the supernatural evil slayer Night Hunter, Rod must learn to master his newly found lycanthropy and mysterious kinetic energy power that only he possesses. And Rod must fight the Dark Covenant in order to avenge his friends and family and to save the girl he loves from the master vampire, Lord Malice. Rodney Marcelli is Nightwolf, and Nightwolf is now available 1 to 7 is live on Kickstarter through May 11th from the creator teams of Rob Motari, Mog Park, and Carlos Arena and Gat Melvin. So join the Wolf Pack by backing the Kickstarter today at lonewolves.com. And that's everything that I got with Nightwolf, guys. Go check it out. And enough about that, though, because I have with me comic creator Steve Ellis. So welcome to the show.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, no, I am very, very excited to have you on. Obviously, I am super excited about Big Foot Moonshine and all sorts of fun stuff that's going on with this. And clearly, everybody's being called today now. Oddly enough, it's crazy, but obviously you got Moonshine, Bigfoot, Moonshine, Muscle Cars, and Mayhem. So before we get into that, though, I do want to talk a little bit about you because you've been in the comic industry for a while. You've crossed a lot of different lines, and you've done so many different things. So tell everybody about yourself before we dive into your, the book.
Okay, well, I guess the first thing is, I got my start working at Marvel back in the 90s, and then worked for Valiant, DC, and Malibu, forgive me, way back then. And then started doing some of my own projects, like The Silencers with Fred Van Lente and High Moon, which was the winner of the web project from DC Comics, Zuda. And then I did a long series called The Only Living Boy, which was a 400-page, epic young adult book. And now I'm working on Moonshine Bigfoot with Zach Howard, which is a big blast.
Yeah, no, the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that obviously, this book is going to have an association with Image. It's doing well on Kickstarter. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows and has an idea that you've been doing this for a while. And it's not, your first project out. And so obviously there's a lot of stuff going on with it. There's a lot of other things. And there's a lot of talent that has been brought into this book in a lot of ways. And so I wanted to just give everybody a heads up that when you're reading this, you're dealing with industry pros versus, somebody's first Kickstarter, which I think is very important at this point because at this stage, trust is a massive key on Kickstarter.
Yeah, that's true. And, I've done Kickstarters before. We did The Only Living Boy, and we did that. It turned out really well. I've done a couple of my own for some fantasy art cards that I've done. And those I pretty much, got done. So I don't see any stumbling blocks in our way, except just, time to get it done, which, we have for the next few months, thanks to the Kickstarter. But, it's just we're all really excited about getting it going. Zach brought me in on the project. Zach Howard, that is, and he's been known for doing Hellboy and Marvel stuff and a whole bunch of other things. So he's inking my pencils, which is just nuts because it just looks absolutely sick when he's done putting his magic on them. And the story is really fun. It's just absolutely insane, and I'm really excited about it. It's the first project I've done in the mainstream business in a while because everything I've done has been kind of on the periphery. So that's pretty exciting for me as well.
Yeah, let's get into this because obviously, it's a fun title in a lot of ways. It's Bigfoot Moonshine. And there's a lot of stuff going on with it. So what is the basic premise for those who don't know about this book? hearing about it because the name screams fun. I mean, it screams fun.
So it's set in the late 70s, early 80s, and Bigfoot is a moonshiner who lives and he is Bigfoot, like the cryptid monster, and he's grown up with a family in Georgia, a human family, and he has become a moonshiner, and he really just wants to drive around in his souped up Mustang and deliver his moonshine to his girl, with his girl, and the police of course don't like that, and then they find out that his moonshine has a special effect, and it allows you to see through the conspiracy that controls the world. And so now everybody who controls the world is after Bigfoot, and they want to stop him from delivering his moonshine.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. How did this even come about? Because this is where this gets really fun, is that obviously you have cryptid Bigfoot, you have muscle cars in there, and those two things shouldn't go together. I mean, you don't really expect them to go together. And then obviously you then throw moonshine in there. Moonshine has always sort of gone with muscle cars to some degree, running it and things of that nature. And then, I think you're down south and you're in the 70s, 80s. And so how did this get all there? Because it's a very interesting mixture.
Well, yeah, it started with basically the idea of kind of like all the things that Zach, Mike, the writer, and I grew up with. Kind of when I was little, Bigfoot was on TV every Saturday afternoon. They always had the Terror of Bigfoot movie on Saturday afternoon. It was like a real life Bigfoot, coming to. So when I was a kid, I used to go out and make Bigfoot footprints in my backyard to scare my neighbors. Thought I was clever. But it was really part of that. And then we all kind of bonded over the Smokey and the Bandit kind of Dukes of Hazzard thing of driving muscle cars and running moonshine and trying to keep the sheriff off your back. But then the whole idea of, Bigfoot's a cryptid. So the world doesn't want Bigfoot, or the bad guys don't want Bigfoot out there, and they don't want Bigfoot selling something that's going to open people's eyes to the conspiracy. So it's kind of a little bit of They Live, with Rowdy Roddy Piper, you put on the sunglasses, you see the aliens. In this case, you drink the moonshine and suddenly you realize the world is controlled by these bad guys called Big Level. And they don't want that. So the whole, they're in control, and they want Bigfoot basically under their thumb.
Yeah, let's get into the story a little bit too, because at this point, obviously you have Bigfoot, and Bigfoot, just as you said, he wants to run his moonshine, wants to be with this girl, and he really wants to just mind his own business in a lot of ways. And he doesn't want any problems. He doesn't really care about seeing the world. He doesn't want a great batch of moonshine. He just wants to run it, make some money, drink it, have a good time. And then he gets thrown into this crazy adventure and this crazy circumstance where it's him, his girl, I think Amethyst, Uncle Pineapple is in there, who is a black market shady individual, but obviously an ally. I don't think he's fighting against Bigfoot, but he might have a vested interest in some of this. And so what is this like? Because you have, the heroes in this story, then you got Big Level, and then you have a third force in there that's just hunting cryptids. And then they're used, and they're kind of Team Rocket, for lack of a better word.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny because they're kind of so Bigfoot has a lot of enemies. One is the local sheriff, who just wants to stop him because Bigfoot's running moonshine on this land, but no one believes him, and no one's willing to give him money to hunt down Bigfoot. And then, of course, there's the local group called ABFATCH, which is the American Bigfoot and Alien and Cryptid Hunters. And they've got rumors of Bigfoot. They heard he's in the swamps, so they're going after him. And then there's this guy who used to date Amethyst, who was very, very jealous of Bigfoot. So he has souped up his car to try and hunt down Bigfoot and chase him down and stop him from being successful delivering his moonshine. So that guy, I think is also a moonshiner, so he's kind of like on the same, level. And then, now I'm running. Then there's Big Level, which is this organization that rules the world, and the newest member, or not the newest member, the newest leader of Big Level is the youngest son of the Level family, Thaddeus Level, and his father, who used to run the evil organization, who held a very, very big presence in Thaddeus's life, basically, ruled it with an iron fist, and but he passed away. So Thaddeus is trying to live up to his dad's reputation, but Thaddeus is kind of a bumbling kind of fool who tries to run this world dominating organization. Luckily, he has his secretary, Miss Severe, because Miss Severe basically makes sure all of his T's are crossed and his I's are dotted, and helps him get all of his crazy plans taken care of. And there's also his grandfather, who used to be the leader of Big Level, who just aged out of it, who's basically always telling him how Thaddeus never can live up to his father or his grandfather or anybody else, and is putting him down. So Thaddeus has some, he really has to prove himself in this job. So he's really focused like a laser on catching and stopping Bigfoot from releasing the moonshine to the world. And Uncle Pineapple, who you mentioned before, is basically Bigfoot's dealer. He brings the moonshine to Uncle Pineapple, and Uncle Pineapple used to be a kids show host, and he has a talking emu that he talks through on his hand, and the emu actually runs the business, and Uncle Pineapple's kind of drunk. But basically, the puppet runs the business while Uncle Pineapple drinks his way into oblivion. But so the emu basically runs a speakeasy where they sell the moonshine out of the back of his gas station, and so the moonshine it gets into the world and gets the notice of Big Level, because people are starting to wake up, like politicians and other people starting to wake up to the big conspiracy. So now Big Level is trying to hunt down where this moonshine's coming from, and he's going through he's going through Uncle Pineapple. He's trying to hunt him down, and one of the first things he does is he sends the Chupacabra after Bigfoot to try to kill him. And there's going to be a lot more, cryptids as the story goes on as well, and then some evil robots that Big Level builds and all kinds of stuff.
So let's actually talk about this, because at least when I read comics, I don't read comics for the heroes. I read comics for the villains. And I read comics in a lot of ways because I'm curious what Lex Luthor is going to do to Superman. First thing, what Superman is going to do, and how is Superman going to respond. And so when and obviously I haven't read this book, I backed it, I'm excited for the 4 issues. But I'm excited to see what Big Level does and what they throw to Bigfoot and how he responds. And I feel that a lot of stories don't necessarily create a good enemy or an enemy that is aggressive or has a cause. And to me, that's the essence of storytelling, is when your hero doesn't need a cause. Your hero wants to do good. It's what does your bad guy want to do to accomplish? And in this case, obviously, Big Level wants to prove, and Thaddeus wants to prove to grandfather, and I guess to his father to some degree, that, hey, I could run this. Right. I don't know if he really cares about the moonshine aspect. It's more along the lines of, I can run this organization. And so what is that like? Because now you have this, I guess, Bigfoot just wants to be left alone, and Big Level's coming after him, and they have a cause, and he just wants to sell his moonshine and have a good time.
Right. But now he has to go after, he's going after Bigfoot, and Bigfoot is a big, strong, cryptid guy with a souped-up car and magic moonshine, and he's basically, his original, what do you call it, aspect is kind of like, do we really have to fight, guys? Come on, this is totally fine. And then of course Big Level and all of his goons, force the issue, and then of course it has to be a fight, right? And so like Big Level's trying to prove himself, right? So he's going to throw everything he can at trying to stop Bigfoot, and the more Bigfoot does to foil him, the more Big Level's going to throw at him, because he can't stop at that point, because essentially if he loses ground to Bigfoot, he proves that everyone in his life is right and that he's a failure. So he's got all this power, he's got all this control, he's got all this stuff, but he has no ego at all, or he has a terrible ego. So he's just trying to so Bigfoot basically becomes the focus of all of his, energy, frustration, and and all of his power to stop this one cryptid from getting that moonshine out.
Yeah, and to even go further into this too, because there is a nice balance between the fun aspects of this and the serious aspects of this, where obviously for Big Level, they want to maintain power, they want to maintain control, but you also have Bigfoot in a muscle car. I mean, it's
Right.
in of itself, it's like, I don't know how to say that any other way, where when I hear the title Bigfoot Moonshine, you can't think of anything, but you have to laugh about it. But there is a serious aspect to this too. And
Sure.
there's a real consequence, where there's also, a satire element to this, where people are waking up. And, I hate to use the word, drinking the Kool-Aid, Jim Jones. But there is an idea that people are waking up in society, and it happens every 10, 15 years, where there is, a cultural shift, there's a political shift that goes on. And
Sure.
that's obviously that's how I'm interpreting it. Maybe I'm interpreting it very differently than somebody else will, but I find it very much like an allegory. But at the same time, you have Bigfoot running moonshine, and there are funny here, and
Right.
you have a souped up car, and you have, a rival moonshiner just going after Bigfoot, not necessarily to go after Bigfoot, but he wants his girl back, his ex back. And so you have all this crazy stuff going on. And obviously there's going to be drinking going on in this too. So
Yep.
that to balance that, because it is a nice balance when a comic knows how to do, I guess, satire and be serious, but be fun. Because I feel like too many comics want to rewrite and say, we want to make the greatest comic in the world. And they do it way over and I think they forget that, hey, comics are supposed to be fun. It's kind of like seeing a movie. Sometimes you want to go see a movie. I just saw the Mario movie. It was fun. It wasn't, I don't know if it's an Oscar-winning movie, but I don't really care, because I want to escape from things. And that's how I view this book in a lot of ways, is I want to escape.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's certainly there's a lot of comics that are super gritty, and there are a lot of comics that get, political and, serious about stuff. And then and what I think is fun about like Moonshine Bigfoot is that we can have our cake and eat it too. We could talk about, that feeling that I think a lot of us have, that there's, some big organization or whatever that's controlling things, or a group of organizations that's kind of pulling the wool over our eyes. But we can do it, right? Exactly. But we can do it. We can do it in a fun way. We can talk about that in a fun way, because I think everyone has that feelings in some way. Like everyone looks around at the world and goes, how is it that we're in this state that we're in right now, depending on what your life is, whether it's your boss or, your, whatever. It's like, whether it's boss or government or whatever you're worried about, everyone always has something outside their control. And so in this story, that's something we can talk about. But then I think also the kind of the fun part is, I always think, is whenever they talk about big things, I always think is like, how is it that more than 3 people can keep a secret, right? How do they maintain that? I have trouble believing.
I know how they do it.
Well, I don't know. I have trouble believing that you can keep that big a secret, right? So that's why Thaddeus is kind of fun, right? Because he's I don't want to say he's an idiot. He's not an idiot, but he's just so driven by his own lack of ego, or his own not lack of ego, but his own poor ego, that like he's willing to, in a way, break break his organization to stop the organization from being broken. And so, it's like, there are villains like Darth Vader, right? Who's like, scary as all heck when you first see him. And then you find out, oh, actually he was this, scared little kid at one point and blah, blah, blah. Right. With Thaddeus, he can be very scary. He's got a lot of power, but the other side of it is it's all in service to his kind of trying to prove it, and there's a lot of people out there like that. Even though they have the power, they don't seem to recognize it, and they don't recognize the damage they're doing. So we could talk about a lot of stuff in humor that you can't talk about in a regular comic, like a regular serious gritty comic. And I think that's what makes it so much fun. I think about the stuff that oh gosh, now I'm trying to remember his name. Ben Caldwell did some work with him on Prez a few years ago, and he did the Snagglepuss comic and stuff like that. I'm blanking on his name, but like you can do a lot with a little sense of humor that you can't do with a serious story. You can poke fun and you can talk about things and you can explore really, really scary stuff, but also be funny about it. And so it makes it a little easier to take it,
Yeah, no, again. My take, and this is my biggest problem, is that unfortunately I have the problem when media collectively is it's really hard to find good stories right now. It's really hard for me to find, I'm a huge anime fan, and it's so hard for me to find a good anime that is like, oh, this is great and this is brilliant. And I've seen a lot of the good stuff. Same thing with sci-fi. I've read a lot of the good stuff. And so I think it goes back to the idea also, even just something fun. Like, I try to find a fun show on Netflix, and it's hard.
It's hard.
And I'm not looking, I'll be very honest. I really enjoyed that 90s show. I didn't think it was necessarily the greatest thing ever. I thought it was fun.
I thought there was some fun stuff in that. I was very surprised. I was a little afraid it was just going to be that 80s show.
And so, but I didn't think it was that 70s show. I don't think it's at that caliber, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I thought it was a good 5 hours. And this is my biggest problem. And then when I'm picking up this book and I'm excited for it, it's going to be a fun read. And I think that's something that I think a lot of comic creators have forgotten. And that's why I think it's interesting. But just because something is fun doesn't mean it can't be intellectual. And I think it's a real issue right now in the whole stratosphere of comics is that there's a lot of garbage out there. I hate to say it. And I don't mean to discourage people, but I don't think it's art-wise. I think it's storytelling. I really think it's storytelling because I think there's a lost art of it. And I think it's a problem.
You mean like the scripting, or do you mean the art of the artist to make the story readable?
Oh, I mean just even this the concept.
Yeah,
the way you could tell how a boy went to go get milk at the store. You can make that a very interesting story, meaning he flew over a dinosaur or a pterodactyl picked him up. Now you have a more interesting story. Or you could just say he walked to the store and got the milk and came home. And I think that's what the problem is in comics. I don't even think it's the scripting. I think a lot of people don't know how to necessarily create suspense or create, a fun concept or even just pace it correctly. Where, you can make a guy go and get milk, and it could be that he fell through the sewers and have to navigate, and it's the most difficult trip ever to get milk. Meanwhile, he only had to go a block and a half away. And
it becomes an epic, right?
And then so that's my biggest problem is that I think a lot of comic people have just become lazy. And I think they've lost how to tell a story. I really do.
I don't know if it's laziness. But a lot of there's a difficult thing, I think, especially if you're working for like a Marvel or a DC, where you're acting as a brand manager more than you are acting as an artist. And when you're doing that, you don't have the room to explore really interesting stories because you've got these breaks put on you to keep you within it's like, well, this character could never do this. And my question which always used to get me into trouble, is what if that happened? What if they did do that? What if, what if what if the character screwed up and then had to pay for that? And they didn't like that story when I was, you pitch that to a character like, like I was pitching it to one of a story to one of the big two a few years ago, and I always believe that a story is motivated by character, right? Character's flaws or a character's, what do you call it? Eccentricities or whatever makes that character unique is what's going to drive the story. And I had pitched this story at one point where a major character that at one of the two would failed. Not only failed, but failed and fell flat on their face, and then had to pick themselves back up. And so it was a story about a hero who screwed up so badly that everyone hated him, and then he had to figure out how he could get himself back into the world's good graces. But a very human story. And I think one of the hard parts is when you're dealing with an iconic character, no one wants them to be human, or at least the publisher doesn't want them to be human, because that changes the character too much.
I'll ask you a question because it plays right into this. When was the last time Superman was humanized? I mean, it's been a while, right?
I mean, it's hard for me to say because I don't read all the Superman books, but like even I could say about like Batman being human, because Batman is human, right? And sometimes you look at him and you're like, okay, he's this multimillionaire dude whose parents died when he was young, but now he's like, what, 40? And he's still dealing with that, apparently. And he's still running around fighting, beating up everybody. He's got all the money he could possibly have. And he's really just fighting a problem with his own rage most of the time, not to become just as bad as the other guys. And that's not a story that we necessarily all can relate to. Very few of us are multi-billionaires who can enforce their will on the poor people of Gotham. Like we just don't have that. So I think part of like the thing about creating a character like Thaddeus or creating a character like Bigfoot is to find something in them that makes you feel like them, like they're someone you can meet. And so Bigfoot is just a guy you would meet who's just kind of trying, brew his beer or whatever, and doesn't want the government to come and, tax him or whatever, or doesn't want, Anheuser-Busch to get in on his business or whatever. He's just trying to make his thing, trying to do his thing and live his life. And then, Big Level is just this, Thaddeus is this guy who has this big ego problem with his dad. And that informs the whole story is, like, who is, what is it to be someone who has absolute, incredible power, but then doesn't have the self-worth to be able to activate that power, and people, and that's very real to a lot of people dealing with, that kind of thing, like, someone in their family that doesn't believe in them or whatever. So it's finding a character that, that's always one of the characters, because like, what problems does Superman have, like you said, maybe, and then you end up with, at a certain point, it's real difficult to find a story that drives that, and then you end up with, let's kill Lois Lane, and then he'll get really angry and kill the Joker and go insane. But that's also not really human, because most people don't do that. Like, even if your family was murdered, most people wouldn't go murder the murderer, right? So it's this whole, they're not reacting the way that humans react,
This is why I stopped reading the big two for the most part. I mean, the only thing I'm reading in DC right now is Justice League Ruby, because I think it's fun, and that's my whole thing, is that it's a fun comic.
Did you ever? Oh, sorry. Speaking of Justice League, did you ever read the old Giffen DeMatteis Justice Leagues?
I've read some of it.
Oh man! So one of the greatest things about that book is, at least for me when I was reading it, is it's funny, but it was also serious, and it was lighter at first. For a long time, it was lighter. Batman was in it, but it wasn't like too serious. The heroes would go and solve problems, but then they would also poke fun at each other, and they were kind of like this family, right? And you kind of got this sense of this family of people, like, a team that, teases each other, makes fun of each other. They all hate Guy Gardner. And then there's one issue. I'm not going to tell you what happens, but there's one issue where, everything seems just like a normal Justice League issue. And then a bad guy comes and starts killing them off. And it's devastating. And it's like you're reading the comic because like now these characters have become your family. You know what I mean? Like they're your friends. And now when they start getting killed and you see the other characters reacting and being scared, you're like, you really feel it in your gut. It's terrifying.
It's kind of like Identity Crisis by Brad Meltzer in a lot of ways.
Sure. Yeah.
Like all of a sudden you just have people start dying and it's kind of like, what's going on here? And
but I think that even more though, at least for me, I really related to especially when they first came out, I really related to the fact that the characters had a sense of humor and it made them very, very human to me. And so like, instead of like, if an iconic hero dies or gets, damaged like Batman, it's like, well, okay, is this just a storyline where they're just going to kill off Batman and bring him back in a few months? But if a lower end character who, is complaining about the fact that he's overweight and can't get a date and he's, but he's still fighting crime, right? And then he's the one whose life is threatened. You're like, oh shit, that could be me. You know what I mean? That could be my friends. And, and the superheroing thing is just their day job instead of my day job, and so then it's suddenly like, oh my gosh, like the stakes are super real. You never worry about Arnold Schwarzenegger getting killed in a movie, but Shaun of the Dead, well, Shaun might have died, so and that's one of the things I think we're trying to explore in this is that the characters are, real people with real stakes and real humanity. And
there's a concept. I'm a big manga fan.
Yeah.
And this is why people are now gravitating towards manga, is that when a character dies, minus Dragon Ball guys, what it is that the character doesn't come back.
Right.
And I think it's very important that there's finalization in comics.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real issue with DC and Marvel is that, great, you kill Captain America off, cool. Maybe we have 20 issues without Captain America, but then he's back within like a year, maybe even 6 months. And it's like, cool, great, that's wonderful, but who cares because he's back? And
it's a difficult thing for the writers to deal with. It's really difficult because you can't have permanent consequences because, like I said before, you're maintaining an intellectual property. You're not creating art, I guess, you're making a product. And that product has to maintain, like, if they change let's say more than Captain America, but if they change, say, Superman and change Superman's looks or whatever, suddenly you have the problem of having to change all of your merchandise that goes around the world, right? So you can only change it for a few months before you got to reset it back to Clark Kent and Lois Lane and all that other stuff. It's too much of a economic driver and not as much of a story. Yeah,
it's a problem I don't want to have.
Well, I really believe in, like, I really, really love stories, especially I like stories about the underdog. So I really like stories about characters who, when I was doing The Only Living Boy, one of the things that made that so much fun is it was a kid on an alien world with all these monsters and evil scientists and all this other stuff going on, but he had no powers and no way of fighting it except his own wits, and that was it. And it's kind of similar in the philosophy behind Moonshine Bigfoot is, like, he's just a guy who, yeah, he's Bigfoot and yeah, he's really strong, but he's just a guy who runs moonshine and he's up against the world,
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and obviously I don't want to ruin too much of it, but I do want to talk more inside baseball with this a little bit and back out of the campaign a little bit, because it's also just as interesting outside of it, of what's going on with it, where you have 4 issues.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have 4 issues. I think it's over 100 pages, and obviously you're releasing the whole series at once.
Yeah.
And so, what is that like? Because that's also a different philosophy. I know there's an element of it going into Image or was an Image. I'm not exactly sure the order of that, but it's a different way how to read a book when you can get all 4 issues at once, get the whole thing, and then binge it.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's like Netflix, right? Nowadays, and it really changes some of the dynamics of the serial nature of the books because you end up with a situation where I'm used to doing well, I'm not used to doing one or the other, but I've done both. I've done like the monthly comics where you want to have a kind of a big what's the word, cliffhanger at the end of an issue, right? And then you want to have a fluid story. And I've seen through comics over the years, like there's been a little bit of what I've noticed is a little bit of a struggle between the old way of doing comics, like way back when I first started, where every issue had to be a complete in one issue with maybe ties to the next issue, unless it was like a mini series or something like that. And then as time went on, as more recent, and as they've started collecting the books, as they started collecting the books into trades, it became this thing where now the the trade is almost more important than the monthly. So are you writing a 20-page book or are you writing a 100-page book, right? And if you're writing a 100-page book, you might pace it differently than you would write a 20-page book. But in the case of working with Zach on Moonshine Bigfoot, Zach and Mike, one of the things that and it's something I worked on doing when we were working on Only Living Boy as well, is recognizing that there's the big story and then there's the individual stories, right? And being able to, just like a really good TV show that has, like old Star. So just like by the time they were done with the episode, the story was over, right? And in this case, and that was how old comics used to be, really, a lot of ways. And so in this case, what we're trying to do is thread the needle between having a really satisfying ending with each issue, and then also having threads that draw you into the next, so that if you're a reader who reads all 4 at once, you won't be sitting there going, "Oh, this is really stilted," because there's these gigantic breaks in the story. But at the same time, having it be something that, like, if you did read them individually, you would get a satisfying read with every single issue and a satisfying kind of resolution to some of the plot points in each book. So, like, and I'm a big believer in a lot of panels. So I'm not a fan of like a comic that has like 2-3 panels per page and is like 500 pages long. So like I grew up with the or not grew up, but I kind of fall into the, I love old school storytelling where a mix of like a little Will Eisner or a little Jack Kirby, and a little Neil Adams in there, where you're actually you're balancing a beautiful page with a lot of action, with movement from panel to panel. So I don't ever like to have a book that doesn't have a lot going on. So what I hope is that when you get all 4 issues, you're going to get a really dense, exciting story. And then when they eventually come out as individual issues for the non-Kickstarter people, they're going to get the monthly kind of jazz of, oh, that was really cool, I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, to even talk about that too, because obviously, and correct me if I'm wrong at any point, there is the Kickstarter version of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously that's almost like a preprint in a lot of ways. First thing when it comes out with Image, where I don't know if that's accurate or not, but a lot of times, usually, the Kickstarter is sort of the first run, and then when it comes out in its monthly, I guess, Diamond distribution, That's also sort of still, it's a non-Kickstarter first print run, really. And so what
Right.
is that
Yeah.
like is, I guess the Kickstarter is where you can get all the exclusives, because a bunch of the stuff that some of the variants I would imagine are not going to be in Image and in Diamond and things of that nature.
Right. Yeah. There's going to be, there's variants, and then there's original art that you can get ahead of time and things like that. So like, there's a lot of different, like, Zach really, uh, Zach and Clara, his assistant, Clara, who also is I shouldn't say she's just an assistant. She's actually helped come up with a lot of ideas in the project as well. Clara Meath. They both they're running the Kickstarter. So I was brought in to the project as the penciler, but I've gotten really, really invested in the project as a co-creator. But they were like, "We'll do the Kickstarter, and you work on making the art." So they've been focusing on that angle of things. So
What is that like
what?
for you? Because Kickstarters are hard. I ran a Kickstarter.
Yeah,
They're difficult. They're exhausting. And I had a lot more time last time I ran a Kickstarter. And I don't know how I'm going to do it with like a 9 to 5. I don't know how
yeah.
people normally do it. It's a tiring thing. I don't care if this is your first or your 100th Kickstarter. There's no way in hell they're not tiring.
Oh, it's a marathon. I mean, it's like, I've done ones all by myself, and I've done one with small companies working with me and stuff. And then this one's a totally new one because I'm helping, but a main I'm not a main runner of the Kickstarter. So so I'm doing my best to help, and I see like one of the things that happened, which happens too often, is Zach got sick in the middle of the Kickstarter, so it's made it really hard for him to keep things, grinding. So I've been trying to step in and kind of, keep the momentum that he started going, and we're all kind of trying to it's one of those things. So we're in the last few days of the Kickstarter. We're going, okay, let's keep the excitement, let's keep it going. But when you're sick, like both of us actually, we went to Chicago Con and I got sick, and then he got sick like 2 weeks later. So it's like it's a drag when your Kickstarter is kind of what do you call it? Getting hit by life, because life could be really, life could do that, So, we're trying to take the blows and really make it as good as we can, So as much as we can get eyes on it and get people to see the book and help, really kick up the excitement about it is great. That's so doing things like this podcast are really helpful. But yeah, so my experience has been a lot of just kind of, lending support and trying to be as helpful as I can, doing extra art, doing extra drawings, going like we went to Chicago and we did free sketches for anyone who did the Kickstarter at the con. So we've just been, and then meantime, just plugging away, getting artwork done, trying to get pages done and stuff.
Yeah, and then also to go even further into this too, obviously, there's 4 issues, and that's a lot of pages, that's a lot of artwork, and I think a good chunk that's done, but also a bunch of it is not. But what is that like for you as, the penciler, that you really are getting it all done at once? And now you don't have to worry about it. So it's like kind of like a big chunk of time. And I don't know how you function, but I function where it's hard for me to shift gears whenever between editing a show, writing a show, doing interviews. And so I set up my entire schedule in blocks for that reason. So I don't know if that is how you function or if it's a real thing though, right?
I'm laughing because I'm kind of like an octopus, meaning like I have a hand over here, a hand over there, a hand over here, and I'm just like shuffling from one to the next, trying to keep it all. And I would probably do better for having blocks like you're talking about, but I'm not that organized. So what I end up doing is, because I'm used to, after 30 years of doing this, juggling being a freelancer with tons of different clients, and then also producing my own projects. So like when I was doing The Only Living Boy, at the time I was doing that, I was working on other people's comic books at the same time, and then doing art for Magic the Gathering and doing, all these different things, basically to keep the lights on while I did the book, because comics, because the schedules, the way they work, unless you're doing a project for like the big two, you don't have a consistent income for a project. The one nice thing is the difference between this and say something I would be doing for Marvel or DC is Marvel or DC, I'd have 3 weeks to get all the pencils done for a 24-page book. So that would mean over the course of 12 weeks, I'd have to have 100 pages done, right? Is that right? 3 times 4? Yeah, 12. So that's a tight schedule. So what's nice about having this, coming out early with the Kickstarter, it gives us a lot of time to get our act together, so that by the time the books are actually hitting the stands, so that the fans get the Kickstarter people get the books, and then the books hit the stands. And so what's going to happen is they'll be all done before book number 1 even gets out. And then we can just focus on, at that point, hopefully the second series, or, and promoting the current, that one gets in stores and stuff like that. So it's it's actually really nice on that level, because, I'll have probably a few more weeks per book, which means that I can make the artwork better. I can, I'll be less stressed out. So that'll be nice. And it'll just be better. Like, you have to cut corners when you're doing a book, when you're doing a book in 3 weeks at 24 pages, you have to cut corners. You have to. In this, I've already found myself doing things like, oh, that page doesn't work, ripping it up and doing a new one. Because I have a little bit of, because of the Kickstarter, I'll have the ability to just make it better. I'll have the ability to take the time that it takes to really, put the shine on it,
No, I get it. I get it completely. It's just 4 issues is a lot. It's a lot.
I've done, like when I did The Only Living Boy book, that was 400 pages. And I did that in 2.5 years. So I think it was. So I'm used to doing a lot of pages. So the sitting there and drawing is the easy part for me. It's all the rest of the stuff that's hard.
And then obviously I want to back out because of that. And then I want to touch on one more thing before we talk about some words. And the other thing that I like about this, and I'll be very honest, it's part of the reason why I backed it, is that it's rather affordable for 4 issues, where I think it's, 15 or 16 for 4 issues.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I'm in the US, so it's $10 shipping, which isn't bad, all things considering, given how everything is else. So it's like 25, 26 bucks collectively, which essentially is the price of Burger King, in case you didn't know anybody. If you get like a Whopper meal, it's pretty much the price. So if you can't afford the book, just don't go to Burger King for a week, and you'll be better off in many ways.
It's 5 cups of coffee at Starbucks, right? I mean, the great thing is, like, and it's funny because if you do look at a lot of Kickstarters, even newbie creators will charge like $20 for a 24-page issue. And we were thinking about,
it's called pricing me out really quickly.
Yeah. But I was amazed at how like, because I was looking around when we were doing it, and I was like, wow, like they're charging, like I said, like $20 for a 24-page issue. And maybe that's because they're getting people who are outside comics to really focus on it, and they don't know what the pricing is like in comics. I don't know.
I think it's that.
But,
I think it's that. I think it is that. I think that they can't afford to charge less.
Well, that's part of it too. Yeah.
I think it goes back to the idea of saying, look, I can't afford to charge less, and I'm already pushed up far enough against the wall. And my problem with that is, if you want to get me as a reader, you got to get me in at a $10 cover A. And then you
Sure.
can have your nice variants that go all the way up the wall, and that's fine. But I would not be a buyer if this was $60 for these 4 issues. I would
Exactly. Yeah.
probably pass. Nothing against
Yeah.
your art, nothing against anybody. It would just be a little too pricey for a concept that I was legitly scrolling through Kickstarter and seeing. Like, if that makes any sense. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, it would take a lot more to convince me. But at 15, I'm like, I'll take a flyer on it. You
Sure.
know, sounds like
And that's something that, like, you know, that like that I my that's one of the difficult things, right? Had we charged what other people charge for the books on Kickstarter, you'd end up with one. We probably would have made a lot more, but we'd have a lot less people, right? Or we make the same amount on the Kickstarter with a lot less a lot less people. And my goal is always to get the story to as many people as you can. And when we were figuring out the pricing for it, it is a little difficult charging less, for it. At the same, well, okay, it's a lot difficult charging less for it, but at the same point, the hope is that all the people that back it go out there and tell their friends, so that we get a lot of people who are really excited about it, and a lot of people who are kind of pushing for it, and being, in a way, our advocates, as opposed to a few people that are paying a lot of money for it. Like, it's great to have someone spend a lot of money on something. At the same time, is that's one person, and when you're trying to make something that as an artist you want to reach people, if you only reach 20 people, that's not very exciting. But if you can reach like a wide audience with your project, that means you've communicated with an audience. And that's, to me, that's one of the great things about making art, is communicating, right? Making comics is, if only 10 people read my comic, I'd be really sad. Even if it paid me, $30,000 for 10 people, it'd still make me sad. It's like, I imagine, wasn't it the Wu-Tang Clan that like did that one thing where one person bought their album?
Yeah.
I'm like, on one level, okay, great, someone paid for me to do an album. On another level, only one person ever gets to hear those songs. That would be, I think, devastating, like from a creative standpoint, because you don't want to play those songs and you're not allowed, probably, right? It's probably illegal for Wu-Tang Clan to ever play those songs at a concert or to anyone else, because that person now owns them. So I think the greatest thing, and maybe I was spoiled by doing comics when I was younger, but I remember having comics where, they were cutting a comic off if it sold less than 100,000 copies. And, when I first started, and so, like, that's a very different, medium, when you want to you think about communicating to a large amount of people. And as comics have gone up in price and the market's gotten smaller, there's it's a little disappointing when less people are involved. So I think we wanted to make it something that anyone could afford, anyone could do, and could really spread the word of Moonshine Bigfoot.
Yeah, no. It's complicated. I try to keep what I can do as cheaply as possible, but I also play in high-end comics, so I completely get it.
Sure.
I completely get it, and it's very tricky. It's very tricky, and I'm learning in my eBay store how to get merch cheaper, because
Right.
if I can get a book at a wholesale price, I want to try to pass it on to my consumer,
Right.
and so
Yeah.
I'm trying to get $10 books and $300 books, because I want both ends of the spectrum. And I think it's a very important thing. And I think it's one of the biggest problems in comics right now and in Kickstarter, is figuring out how to get a $10 customer and get a $900 customer. And I think you need both.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you might be right. I think you might be right. That that $300 or $400 collectible customer might just be the right person. Like, they're buying that collectible book of art or whatever it is.
I mean, look, I bought stuff that was a $300 tier, but then I bought something that was a $30 tier
Right.
at the same time. And so, I think, and sometimes people will buy the $30 tier and the $300 tier, because I've done that on campaigns, because I want both. But there's also people where I was speaking to somebody, and you go to certain areas, and I'm sure you've been to cons where it's crystal clear the income is either significantly higher than what you're expecting or significantly lower. And you're like, well, I need merchandise that fits that demographic.
Well, and I've definitely hit, I live in upstate New York, and there are areas in upstate New York that are really hurting, and have been for a very long time. And so one of the things I try to do, and it's a different one show, and you say this item is $20, and you go to another show and say this item is $5 because, the area doesn't have the money, that's kind of sticky, you know what I mean? But it's something that I've hit where, like, I've gone to shows where, I'll sit there and I'll say, oh yeah, this comic is, this 100-page book is $10. And they're like, oh, I can't buy a 100-page book for $10. I'm like, but a regular comic is $5 for 20 pages, So then I'm like, okay, well, what did it cost me? And so maybe I sell it for cost at that show, just to have more people read it. I think that hopefully I like the idea that if I get my work out to more people, even if I'm not making, a lot of money on it or whatever, eventually it'll pay back and keep me going. And that's actually helped. It's actually worked. I'm still here after 30 years, and there have been times when, I've go to shows and lost money, but people have my artwork, and maybe that's a mistake, but also at the same time, I'm like, I'm not a great big capitalist. So my, meaning I'm just not good at it. So, my theory is that more people have it. Maybe someday they have money and they buy a comic from someone else that they otherwise wouldn't afford, or they buy a comic from me that they otherwise couldn't afford. Because,
I'm a very greedy capitalist, but my goal is to serve my customers. So in my eBay business, I'm very honest about it. My goal is to serve my customer.
Sure.
And so if my customer is willing to spend something, they get their books perfectly, and they spend more money because their books arrive perfectly. And they are willing to spend another $10 to $20, $30 because they can't find the book because it's sold out. And I keep it as reasonable as humanly possible, where I look at my competitors and I try to be $5 cheaper, because I know exactly how much it costs, but I'm not going to give it away for free. But I also understand that the heart of my business is my customers, and my goal is to serve them. And I think, that's
exactly it. Yeah.
And so at some point, if I have a good customer, I might sell them a book at cost.
Right.
Because if they're buying a bunch of good stuff from me and they bought 9 books from me, I'll sell them a book at cost, because I'm making money over and over and over again, and I want business.
And some of it is too also seeding stuff. Like when I was working on The Only Living Boy, it came out in the regular comic book stores, right? But it also came out in bookstores, in the young adult book section, right? And we didn't write it for little kids or anything like that. We actually wrote it for the same way that like Harry Potter is written for people of all ages, kind of a thing. But the thing is, when I was at a show and there was mostly kids, you'd look around like the kids don't have money to spend unless they can convince their parents. So there were times when I'm like, yeah, here, kid, just don't tell anyone I gave this to you. And I'd do a little extra sketch, or I'd do whatever. And the idea, I think I rationalize it by the idea that someday that kid will remember I bought that, or I got that book from that guy. And then they're going, I want to pick up that book, that book again. And they'll spend the money 10 years from now. Right. And so it'll eventually come back around. You know what I mean?
So let me actually ask you on this.
Sure.
Because my biggest problem I feel in the industry is that, people aren't growing it. They're not facilitating it. And, when, you go to a con and there's a kid there, this is why I think the industry has problems. So, there's a lot of reasons why the industry has problems, but you need to facilitate that young kid into buying comics, getting into it. And I think it's one of the biggest problems too, is that when comics left the supermarket 20, 25 years ago, that was a problem. When comics left Barnes and Noble a while ago, that was a problem. And I don't think that, there are people who don't know where a comic shop is. There are parents who
Right.
don't know where a comic shop is. They've never been in a comic. Yep. There's kids who've never been in a comic shop. There are people.
Well, there's a lot less comic shops than there used to be too, So that's why Barnes and Noble works, because, it is other places where comic book stores aren't. But it's not good for the comic book store, obviously, but it will help people get it who wouldn't ordinarily.
And then manga's eating up the graphic novel section. I've been going to Barnes & Noble almost every weekend for almost 20 years. And I can tell you the manga section has slowly been eating up the graphic novel section.
Oh, slowly. It basically created the graphic novel section. I'll be honest with you, because I don't know. Here I am. I'm going to show my age. Because what was really interesting in the 90s when I was first working in comics, there was this thing called the bad girl craze. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
I'm a Zenescope fan. I'm a Top Cow fan. I'm well aware of bad girl.
Okay, all right.
My business is based on it. It's crazy.
Yeah, but at that time, so like if you go to a Reed Pop show now, right? There's a mix, right? In the late 90s, there hit a point where I was at a con where they basically had strippers on the floor of the convention. And now here's the thing. I'm not against having Vampirella in her tiny little outfit. When I'm talking about every single booth had a booth babe in a tiny little outfit selling their comics. It just doesn't happen anymore. But for a while, it was every single company, every single person who had a show. That's what they were doing. And so what started happening, and I saw it real quick, was moms, especially, and dads didn't go to comic book stores or comic book shows because they seemed more like porn shops than they did like comic book shops. And so you're not going to go take your 11-year-old kid into a store where there's a giant half-naked Mary Jane on the wall, especially if you're a woman, right? And so then guess what happens to the readership? The 11-year-old kids who were like the prime market for comics, we lost like 2 generations of comics readers because of that. And we've never really gotten that back. And it was it was one of those short-term gain, long-term loss kind of situations where on the short term, it looked really great. You made all this money at a con. For the long term, comics got this really bad name. And then what happened with manga was manga kind of swooped right in. At that moment, the Viz and some of those other companies like Simon and Schuster and the book companies came in and they put manga on the shelves of Barnes and Noble. Well, Barnes and Noble is quote unquote safe. It's not a porn shop, right? So parents, oh yeah, go ahead, read the comics, right? So the kids go over, but they didn't have graphic novels because no one was collecting American comics that way at the time. So the only comics to pick up were the manga. So suddenly you had kids laying on the floor all over Barnes and Noble reading manga, and there weren't any graphic novels to read. There were maybe a few, like 10, and it took like the comic book industry like 5-10 years to figure out that they needed to get into the bookstores and start collecting the books. So it was a very weird, it was a moment when the comic book industry, I feel, really hurt itself really badly. And one of the things we need to recognize is that, someone who gets addicted to a comic when they're 11 will be reading them when they're 50, But if you try to sell the book to the 50-year-old, they're going to die in a few years. You got to get that 11-year-old to read comics. And it's not going to work if you try to sell them like it's Batman Kids, because a kid doesn't want Batman Kids. A kid wants Batman. And they want to believe that they're reading the biggest, toughest, scariest, most hardcore. I think it's one of those things where, so I did, when we did The Only Living Boy, the whole idea was let's do something that reads like an adult book, but can be read by a kid, you know, and you know, Moonshine Bigfoot's a different animal. It's for a different audience, slightly older audience. But there's nothing in it. I don't think that that you couldn't like a 17-year-old boy or whatever couldn't, or a 17-year-old girl couldn't enjoy. You know what I mean? Like, and maybe not an 11-year-old. But the idea is making stuff that tells really good stories, that reaches wide audiences, and and hopefully meets people where they are, so that they fall in love with it too. Because I don't know if people are in love with Captain America as much as they used to be.
I don't think they are. I don't think they are. I think it's getting to the point where people are fed up with Big Two, and it's because there's very few original ideas there. And I mean, you said it, where it's a brand. It's not a comic anymore.
Yeah,
it's a brand, and I think also people are just fed up. I mean, I pick up a lot of store exclusive Marvel wise, but I don't read it. I mean, the only thing I read was Rogue and Gambit, and that's entertaining to me, but that's it. I mean, I haven't read the DC title Beyond Ruby Justice League, because that's 7 issues, and that's just fun, and it's not canon, and it's kind of fun to see an anime and the Justice League team up. It's kind of a fun story, you know what I mean? It's an escape, and it's beautifully done, and the covers are sweet on it. So
I find myself following writers and artists. So, like, if I know the writer and the artist on a book, that means I'll probably like the book. But that means that I'm not good at like maintaining any one title, because if they leave that title, I'm probably going to follow them to wherever they're going. Because a good writer artist team is exciting to find, and if they can pull off the magic trick of making a mainstream book good, and then they go and do their own book, then they're probably going to do a great original title. So that's usually my, one of the things that I look for. That's why I look at like Image or Dark Horse or whatever.
I'm torn on some of this, because I follow writers too, and sometimes their work is really good on their indie titles, and it's not so good.
Yeah, well, I mean that's gonna be, that's just humans. Like humans. How many times does a single film writer / director hit it out of the park every single time? There's always a stinker in there somewhere.
With the particular writer, I don't want to name who it is because he follows me on Twitter. But it's either really, really good or it's really, really bad. There's no middle ground. But the stuff he does is good. He's got 2 or 3 really good titles out there, and he's got a few bad ones. So
that's hard being an artist, because you do a creator, artist, whatever. You do your best, and you hope for the best, and the thing is, like, everyone who makes these things, like, I've heard people say, oh, they were slacking. And I'm like, I don't think I know any creator who slacks. It's just, maybe they had a shitty month, but they always put their heart into it, like, because it's not a job you can afford to not put your heart into it, because everyone's looking,
I think my theory is that sometimes somebody tries something and it's just a bad concept. And, look, I do 120 to 130 interviews every single year. There's going to be failures. There's going to be successes. It's just the rule of numbers. And there could be a million reasons why. It could be that I should have zigged when I zagged, and I get it. And so if you view me based on one interview, and you're coming into my show for the first time, and somebody wants to critique it, you should probably take a look at 10 or 12.
Yeah. Don't just look at my one image and say, or my one comic and say, you're good or you suck. It's like, well, maybe I hit it out of the park on that one you saw, and then everything else I do is a stinker. I mean, it could be, I could have a terrible batting average, or, you're lucky enough to have to hit it, to get on base every time without hitting any home runs. Sorry, the baseball analogy just kind of.
I'm a big baseball.
There.
I'm a big
there you go.
I definitely, Oakland won last night. Thank God.
It wasn't against the Mets, was it?
What?
It wasn't against the Mets, was it?
No, the Mets sweep them like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay, good. Sorry. No.
I'm a huge baseball fan. I really enjoy baseball. I enjoy gambling on baseball more than anything.
Really? I'm a terrible lapsed baseball fan. I used to be a huge Mets fan, and we moved to an area where I couldn't get the games anymore. I used to listen to it every day on the radio, and then I couldn't get that anymore, and it's just like I've just fallen out of it.
They're a good team. They're a good team.
This year,
I'm a Mets fan, and it's fun, and they're doing all right. And their Japanese pitcher is a beast.
Yeah,
he's a beast.
I always I used to live in Brooklyn, and so you were either a Yankees fan or a Mets fan, and I just couldn't get into being I was already a Mets fan. I was a Mets fan, tried and true from when I was a little kid. But when the Yankees would go into the World Series and the whole town would be excited, I was always like, I just don't know if I can root for the Yankees because they weren't the underdog. They were always winning. So they always win. So
I can root for the Yankees if they're not playing the Mets.
Yeah.
I can't root for the Yankees if they're playing the Mets, but if the Yankees are in the World Series, I'm rooting for the Yankees. It's not like I'm a fan, but like
I had trouble with that because for a long time they were winning like every year, and I was like, okay, can we get some what do you call it? Some turnover in here, like.
I must say though, when Boston beat them, I think what was it like in 4 games, and they broke the curse.
Yeah,
it was so sweet. It was so sweet.
Yeah, that was brilliant. I mean, in a way, like the Yankees kind of became the evil empire for a while, and like someone had to take them down, and it was good that it was the underdog, right? I don't know. I'm like I said, I'm a big fan of that story.
I forgot who said it really well, and it was a John Cena reference, and he said to John Cena, "You become the New York Yankees." And it was brilliant.
Oh, wow.
John Cena's from Boston. And so it was great because it was so true. He said, you've become the dynasty. You've become the it factor. Yeah. And it's so true. But this is so off topic.
Yeah. Well, not really. I mean, there are comic book artists out there who are the Yankees, right?
There are.
And comic book characters out there who are the Yankees. But that it comes down to a certain amount of philosophy, right? Like I always loved the story of I grew up with the Mets and they were always terrible, right? So they were always terrible, and then they won in '86, and that was like the greatest thing that ever happened in my entire life, So like, I mean, they went through, my entire childhood. They were the worst team in the leagues frequently, and then suddenly they win the World Series out of nowhere. It was like, what? The whole world changed, So I love that story. Like, it's a story I keep, it's Luke Skywalker blowing up the Death Star, So that epic is kind of like, it runs through everything for me. So I just never got to be the guy who rooted for the Empire, it's just, the
crazy,
the way it is, So I tend to have that in my stories, a lot.
Yeah, and then obviously just going into rewards a bit. Obviously,
oh sure, yeah.
There's the gas money thing, which is just throw like $1 at it. Then there's the digital download for people who maybe don't want to pay for the shipping, maybe they don't want the books in physical, maybe they live in another country because it's very difficult to ship and it's impossible to ship to anywhere outside the U.S. and Canada for the most part. Super expensive as well. Then there's all 4 issues for $15, which is pretty cool. Then you get them signed for $30. Then there's the blank, sketch cover.
Right.
And then character concept sketch cover. Or no, character concept. Then there's the charter member of ABFAC, ABFACA.
Yes. That's the American Bigfoot Alien and Cryptid Hunters Association. ABFAC.
I love that. I love that concept. And then there's, I think, a sketch cover, a sketch by Steve Ellis, which is you, or Zach Howard. Then there's original page of pencils and inks. There's the everything tier, double page tier, original art tiers. And there's some other stuff out there too. I mean, there's like a bunch of different stuff you can get in there, pretty much.
Yes, and then and what I really like is doing the sketch cover tiers and stuff like that is really fun because you know so we have one in there that's just the sketch cover, and then we have one where we draw on the sketch cover. So trying to cover all bases because some people just like the blank covers. So you know it works.
And then there's just a bunch of stuff, and then obviously, I mean, you got stretch goals in there. I think all the stretch goals are digital. I think, which is cool.
There are a bunch of digital comics. I think at the moment, the stretch goals that they put up are all comics that Zach and I were looking at, and I think there's like 13 free comics that they're all getting. So for the $15, you're getting like all of Moonshine Bigfoot, as well as comic books by Ben Templesmith and a bunch of other people who I just can't think of right now on the top of my head. But like Chris Ryle, Ben Templesmith, and stuff like that, and people like that.
So there's that out there, and then there's some just other stuff as well. And
describe specifically what it is.
Just super, super interesting because there's like just a million things, and it's also a hell of a lot easier to distribute digital comics than anything else.
Oh yeah, that it is. I mean, my only thing is for me personally, and this is just because I'm an old man, I like having a physical comic to read. But that's just me. So, but I love having like on my iPad, I'll have like a whole bunch of books that I'll read that aren't like they, like sometimes I think, there's books you want to read, but you can't spend, all your money on the comics. So you get the digital one instead, so, there's kind of an option there for both types of people.
I agree. There's also books I don't want to own physically. I'll be very honest. There's a lot of books I don't want to own physically. So,
well, and that's fun. That's really interesting because there are different kinds of collectors. There are some collectors who only have physical. And then a few years ago, I had someone come to my table and had me sign his Kindle. Because he bought a Kindle and a Kindle case, and he had everyone sign the Kindle case for the different comics that he had. And I was like, that's a really cool collection, because he's got them all, he had them all on his Kindle, and he had everyone he liked sign them. So, I guess it's just a different way of collecting stuff.
It's very interesting. And then obviously there's a bunch of add-ons too, where there's coasters, keychains, stickers.
Yeah.
A bunch of other stuff if you want it. Anything you pretty much want can be added on, I think.
Yep, there's a poster, done by Zach and I, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's, like you said, like the keychains, mugs, and and really fun, fun merchandise because the logos are really cool and the characters look really great. We had actually the colors on the character designs were done by Stefan Rue, who is the one great DC artist. So that's really that was really exciting. And then we're gonna have Nelson do the colors in the book, and he's amazing. And I'm blanking on his last name. I'm sorry, Nelson. But he's an award-winning colorist, so the art's just gonna look like probably just, I don't know. I'm blown away every time I send my pencils away and it comes back. I'm just like, holy cow. I like had no idea it could look like that. So it's really exciting.
Yeah. And then I mean, pretty much anything that is Big Foot Moonshine related can be added on. If you want extra books, I'm sure that could be added on, and all sorts of fun stuff out there.
Yeah.
And pretty much if there's something that's not on this campaign that somebody wants, I'm pretty sure that something could be worked out by emailing somebody on this campaign.
Oh, yeah. I think go through you could email Zach or Clara Meath. I think you go through the Kickstarter, what do you call it? The Kickstarter site too, and they have, you can contact them through there as well.
But I do want to back out for a final time out of this whole thing.
Okay. Hey, no problem.
Enough of your time. But I am curious, where you think the industry is going, because you've been doing this forever and almost 30 years. And obviously, I think you've seen everything at this point. I'm sure
I've seen a lot. Yeah.
Maybe you haven't seen everything, but you've seen a lot, I should say. And I'm very curious where you see it going, because you've been in, I guess, traditional small publishing, you've been in indie, Kickstarter, crowdfunding, and you run the gamut.
In the book industry as well, a part of it. So, well, I mean, I think where's the industry's going is it's hard to say. Okay, first off, I mean, obviously. And one of the things that I've always noticed about comics is that there's always someone saying that it's going to die. There's always been, like, from the day I got into comics till now, there's always someone saying, oh, it's going to die. But what I've noticed is that comics is a big word, and it's a big medium. And like, I think of manga as comics as well. So the way I look at it is, once you start getting exclusive and saying only this is comics, then yeah, that this is comics part might go away. But what I'm excited for is, I teach at Syracuse University, and I'm excited for the fact that, like, the program I used to teach for was mostly illustration. And now almost all of the creators there are into comics. And I figure if that many people, like, when I went to college, there was no one into comics. I was the only one. So now everyone is doing comics. So I think if there's that many people making them, there must be a lot of people looking to read them. And so I just think it's that comics is everywhere and everything. And I think it's going to become very individualized to the creators, meaning some people are going to do a webtoon. Other people are going to be on Tapastic. Other people are going to be working through Scholastic books. Other people are going to be going through Image or publishing an indie, or doing a Kickstarter, or doing, like, so what I think is that the business that it used to be, that was just these two big companies pumping out stuff through a single distributor to all these stores, is going to be only an aspect of how big it is. And that it's going to be something where the business becomes this kind of multi-faceted. I mean, it already is, right? But I think it's just going to get more so. I think that if you want a comic about a thing, you're going to be able to find a comic about that thing, because there's going to be so many people creating. And I think it's really exciting, because from an art standpoint, it means that there's just going to be a lot of different materials. From a big corporation standpoint, it might be scary, because they won't be, the people that are always saying it's going to die are usually the people who are working in that big corporate version of it, because they're always looking at, how do we keep the money people happy, right? But if you're looking at it from a creative standpoint, I think, and you're looking at it from a small standpoint, like you and your team are trying to keep a book afloat, I think a small team can keep a book afloat and keep it going through all the different avenues. So I think it's really exciting on a lot of levels, because it's, I mean, for lack of a better word, it's democratized, and that probably means that no one's going to be selling 100,000 copies of their book, but it means that a lot more people are going to have books. So a lot more people who couldn't previous. So it's going to be a big, wide world. And I think the hardest part is going to be, like, you say, oh, I can't find any comic book to read. I think the hardest part is knowing where to go to find it. It's that your comic that you want to read might be on Tapastic, you know what I mean? Or it might be a web comic, or it might be wherever. And the hard part isn't going to be necessarily, does it exist? It's just like, how do I get my hands on it? Because we're not going to have that. The store isn't going to be the only place it already isn't the only place anymore. I guess does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's a problem I already have, where I don't know anymore where to go. And it's in a lot of things, not just comics, I mean, collectively. And I don't disagree, but
it's happening with TV shows too, and movies, with all the different streaming services and everything. It's like you want that movie, but you can't see that movie. Like I wanted to see Weird Al the other day, and I had to have Roku. And I was like, oh, I mean, I'll never be able to see this movie because I'm never getting Roku.
It's a problem. It's a problem. It's an unfortunate problem we all have.
To be Roku, and unfortunately, I think that's a lot of what's going to happen to every medium, and hopefully not to comics, but I feel like it's already a little bit happened.
I agree, and we've been speaking for a while, and I do want to give you a chance to self-promote yourself.
Sure. Okay. Well,
you bother you, hit you up.
Yeah, sure. So I am
Kickstarter, all that fun stuff.
So I am at Steve Ellis Art on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. So I use the same name for all three, and then my website is steveellisart.com. And then right now the big thing I'm doing is promoting Moonshine Bigfoot, which is on Kickstarter. So you just type in Moonshine or type in Bigfoot and you'll probably find it. It's one of the first two, if not the first one. And really just, I'm doing Moonshine Bigfoot. I'm doing cards from Magic the Gathering. I'm doing some other comic book projects that I don't want to talk about now because I'm talking about Moonshine Bigfoot, but I have some other projects in the works that are kind of with other people. But the main thing is, please, jump on the Kickstarter, tell your friends, help us make the book really, really great. The more we're getting on the Kickstarter, the longer we have to make a better book. And that's really the more power we have to make a better book and hopefully make something that's, a really awesome experience for everyone. So I guess that's it.
Yeah, and then I'm just going to keep saying it. If you like something, you need to support it. And in particular, if you like a comic, you need to back it on Kickstarter first and foremost. And then if it obviously is at cons or it goes into Image or wherever it goes, if you missed the Kickstarter, you should back it there too. Or you should maybe even get a second copy because that does help to get these books continuing and growing and all that stuff. And it is very important to back.
Or get a copy for a friend. The best thing that people can do now is if you already backed Moonshine Bigfoot, tell your friends, put a link in your email, in your Facebook or whatever, and tell everybody you know. And if you haven't backed it, check it out and maybe you find something you like.
I agree. And then I'm just going to quickly promote myself. Obviously, I have How to Make Comics on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. I appreciate when people subscribe. I have Buy Me a Coffee if you want to support independent media. Nobody has to, but obviously, if you like something, feel free to support independent media. But more importantly, I really appreciate when people subscribe on YouTube because I am trying to get to 510. I am at 508 on YouTube. I am two away, guys. I am 2 away. I said small goals. Small goals is how we get things done. But obviously, I appreciate people sharing this out, liking it. It goes a long way. It goes a long way. So if you like this and you want to share it out, be my guest, everybody. It means a lot to me more than anything else. And then my ad rates are up there if you want to advertise on this show. And then Nightwolf, I'm speaking with Rob Matari tomorrow, so that's going to be fun. I'm sure he's going to correct my ad at some point. So I'm looking forward to that. But yes, go back Kickstarters, guys, is the point. And on that note, I'm going to give you the final word.
All right. Well, I guess thank you very much. And support Moonshine Bigfoot.
And that is a wrap, everybody.